Okay, let's unpack this. Get ready because we're diving deep into something really, well, transformative. How embracing vulnerability can fundamentally reshape how we live, love, parent, even how we lead.
Yeah, and we're drawing heavily today from Brené Brown's huge bestseller, Daring Greatly.
Right. It's this incredible book about vulnerability, sure, but also courage, worthiness, and shame.
It really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It offers this powerful way forward, moving beyond just, getting by, towards a more engaged, what she actually calls a wholehearted life.
And our mission here really is to cut through all the noise, pull out the absolute must-know insights from this work for you, give you that shortcut sort of to really grasping these powerful ideas.
And the central thread, the thing tying it all together, is this. Daring greatly requires vulnerability, full stop.
And the book makes it incredibly clear vulnerability is so often, and she argues dangerously, mistaken for weakness.
So we're going to explore what it actually looks like to show up, be seen, and why that simple act might just be one of the bravest things you can possibly do.
Okay, let's jump right in then. The whole idea, daring greatly, it actually comes from somewhere specific, doesn't it? A famous speech.
That's right, yeah. Theodore Roosevelt. The man in the arena. He gave it, gosh, way back in 1910, April 23rd, in Paris at the Sorbonne.
And there's this one passage everyone knows or should know. It's just so powerful.
It really is.
Oh.
I want to share it.
Yeah, okay, so it goes. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again.
Because there's no effort without error.
Exactly, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement? And who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly?
Wow. And that quote, that is vulnerability, right? As Brown unpacks it in the book, that feeling of being in the arena.
Totally. It's not about guaranteeing you'll win or making sure you never lose. It's about knowing both are real possibilities and you choose to get in there anyway. You choose to engage, be all in.
And this is right where that big misunderstanding creeps in. Daring greatly demands vulnerability, and Brown is just crystal clear. Vulnerability is not weakness.
Right. That's like core message number one.
Absolutely. Her definition is simple but deep. Vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Just think about those three things. Uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure.
Yeah.
Are those optional parts of life? Not really. They're fundamental. They're just baked in.
So that's the crux, isn't it? You can't avoid them. So the only real choice you have is how you react, how you respond when you are faced with that uncertainty or that risk or that feeling of being emotionally exposed.
Exactly right. And how willing you are to actually lean into that vulnerability, well, that directly shapes the depth of your courage, the clarity of your purpose.
And the flip side.
The flip side is the more you try to shield yourself, to protect yourself from feeling vulnerable, that's really just a measure of your fear, of how disconnected you are.
And what's the cost? The cost of waiting until you feel perfect or bulletproof before you step into that arena.
Oh, it's huge. The book really spells it out. We end up sacrificing relationships, opportunities, things that might not come around again. We waste precious time. We hold back the unique gifts, the things only we can bring.
Because perfect. Bulletproof. They just don't exist for us humans, do they?
Not even close. They're myths, illusions.
So the invitation, the call from this work, it feels pretty direct. It's step into whatever arena is in front of you. Maybe it's a new relationship, maybe a difficult conversation you need to have.
Or a creative project, a big meeting at work.
Whatever it is, step in with courage, knowing you're willing to engage, willing to be vulnerable. Choose to show up and actually let yourself be seen instead of, staying safe on the sidelines being the critic.
And that choice, that willingness to be seen, even with all the uncertainty, that is daring greatly.
Okay, so if that's daring greatly, why is it so darn hard for so many of us? Brown digs into the environment we're swimming in, what she calls a culture of scarcity.
Ah, yes, the never enough problem. You start seeing it everywhere once she points it out.
It really is pervasive, this feeling of scarcity.
Yeah.
It makes us constantly, hyper aware of what we think we lack.
Yeah, maybe it feels like not enough safety or love or money or time.
Right. And it drives this endless calculation and comparison. We're always measuring ourselves against these impossible ideals, or worse, against these like perfectly curated fictional versions of other people's lives we see online.
Or even just nostalgia, right? Comparing now to some idealized past.
Totally. She references Lynn Twist, an activist and writer.
Yeah, Twist calls scarcity the great lie. She talks about how it can hit you the second you wake up, that first thought, ugh, I didn't get enough sleep, or I just don't have enough time today.
And boom, before your feet even hit the floor, that mindset sets you up to feel inadequate.
So where does this pervasive never enough culture come from? Brown argues it really thrives in environments that are steeped in shame.
Fueled by comparison.
Exactly. And fractured by disengagement. It's not new, she says, but it gets amplified during really difficult collective times. Think about, recessions or major disasters, dramatic events.
Things that leave people feeling generally unsafe and worried?
Right. It creates this sort of low-grade, constant worry that almost feels like a form of societal post-traumatic stress. And you see these scarcity dynamics everywhere. Families, workplaces, schools.
Communities.
Everywhere.
So the book breaks scarcity down into 3 key parts, and it's useful, maybe, for you listening to think about your own life, maybe a group you're part of. See if these ring true. First up, shame.
Is there a fear of ridicule, of being belittled? Is people's worth constantly tied to what they achieve or how productive they are, or just, complying?
Do you see a lot of blaming, finger-pointing, put-downs, maybe favoritism, or just this intense pressure to be perfect?
That's shame culture.
Yeah.
Second, comparison.
Is there constant comparing and rank? Maybe it's overt, maybe it's subtle. Does it feel like creativity kind of gets squashed? Is worth measured by just one narrow standard of what's acceptable or good enough?
And the third piece, disengagement.
Are people afraid to take risks? Is it just easier to stay quiet than speak up? Does it feel like maybe no one's really paying attention anyway?
Yeah, like people are struggling just to feel seen, feel heard.
Brown's research basically concluded that in our larger culture, media, politics, the economy, the answer to most of those questions is a resounding yes.
Which means navigating it, pushing back against it, takes real awareness, real commitment, deliberate effort, because that pressure is just always there.
So if scarcity is the problem, what's the antidote? The book says it's not necessarily abundance. That can just be the flip side, still focused on having more.
Right. The true counterpoint to never enough is simply enough, or what she calls wholeheartedness.
And getting to that place, that feeling of enough, of living wholeheartedly.
It absolutely requires vulnerability and worthiness. It's about facing that uncertainty, the risk, the emotional exposure, while also fundamentally believing that you are enough. Just as you are right now.
Which brings us right back to the challenge, doesn't it? In a culture soaked in shame, comparison, disengagement, it is incredibly hard to own your vulnerability. It's hard to step into that arena believing you're worthy of being there.
Yeah. The book basically says the biggest casualties of this scarcity culture are precisely our willingness to be vulnerable and our ability to live and engage from that place of inherent worthiness.
And that just underscores why we need to unpack vulnerability itself. Let's tackle those common myths that Brown debunks. They are so pervasive.
Okay. Myth number 1, the big one. Vulnerability is weakness.
You hear this constantly, and Brown points out this really interesting paradox here. We often judge vulnerability in other people, right? We might see it as weakness in them.
Even while we're desperately trying to hide our own.
Exactly. Instead of seeing their courage, we criticize, maybe because it reflects back what we're too afraid to do ourselves.
Could be. And she argues so strongly that vulnerability, remember, uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure, isn't just connected to the dark emotions like fear or shame or grief.
It's the foundation for all of them.
It's the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, creativity, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Hope, accountability, authenticity, they all grow from vulnerability.
Just think about it for a second. Falling in love. Is that certain? Safe. Emotionally contained. No way.
Putting your art, your ideas, your work out into the world. No guarantees how it will land. Definitely uncertain, risky, exposing.
Even just allowing yourself to fully sink into a moment of joy, knowing it won't last forever, that takes vulnerability too.
The real danger, the trap, is when we confuse feeling vulnerable with being a failure. When we start seeing our own emotions as liabilities we need to suppress or manage.
But to have a rich emotional life, to actually feel things fully.
You have to engage with vulnerability. You have to be willing to feel the emotions that come with it.
The book shares so many examples for people she interviewed about what felt vulnerable to them. And the list is, well, it's life, isn't it?
It really is. Things like
Oh.
sharing an opinion you know isn't popular, asking for help when you need it, saying no, starting a business.
Helping a partner through end-of-life care, initiating intimacy, encouraging your kid when you know failure is likely, even probable.
Reaching out to a friend whose child just died. Signing your mom up for hospice. Going on that first date after a divorce. Saying, I love you first.
Putting your writing out there, your art, getting promoted, or getting fired. Falling in love, trying something totally new.
Bringing a new partner home to meet the family. Getting pregnant after miscarriages. Waiting for biopsy results. Reaching out to your struggling teenager.
Exercising in public when you feel self-conscious. Admitting you're scared, stepping up to bat after you just struck out, telling your CEO you can't make payroll.
Having to lay people off. Presenting your big idea and getting crickets. Standing up for a friend or for yourself. Being accountable when you messed up. Asking for forgiveness. Having faith.
Wow, just hearing that list, I mean, does any of that sound like weakness to you?
Not a single one. It sounds like truth. It sounds like courage. Raw, messy human courage.
And the word itself, vulnerability, it's interesting. It comes from the Latin vulnero, which means to wound.
Right, so it means being capable of being wounded, open to attack or criticism.
Whereas weakness implies you can't withstand it. So vulnerability isn't weakness. In fact, Brown suggests that trying to avoid vulnerability, pretending you don't have those tender spots, that actually makes you more fragile, more easily hurt when life inevitably bumps up against them.
And there's research to back this up too. Like in health psychology, studies show when people can actually acknowledge their perceived vulnerability, say, to a health risk, they're paradoxically more likely to take positive action, like changing their behavior.
And in social psychology.
Similar findings, people who felt totally invulnerable to like deceptive advertising, they were actually the most likely to be swayed by it because that illusion of invulnerability meant they didn't put up any real mental defenses.
Brown tells this really compelling story about giving her big TED Talk in Long Beach. She was absolutely terrified beforehand, just wanted a perfect script, a guaranteed success formula.
We've all felt that.
Right, but she noticed the talks that really resonated, the one that connected, weren't the perfectly polished ones. They were the ones where the speakers were just real, genuine, themselves.
So she made a choice.
Yeah, a really brave one, to basically ditch the script, embrace the uncertainty, and just try to connect, to look people in the eye. To, as she puts it, kind of be naked on stage, metaphorically speaking.
And the reaction afterwards really highlighted this myth. She asked the audience, okay, how many of you struggle with vulnerability because you see it as weakness?
And hands shot up everywhere.
Then she asked, but when you watch people up here being vulnerable today, how many of you saw that as courage?
Same result, hands everywhere.
And that is the core paradox right there. We admire vulnerability in others. We see their willingness to show up as pure courage. But when it's us, we fear it's just inadequacy. We're terrified. Our messy, imperfect truth isn't good enough.
She talks about finding her own courage in that moment by thinking about her loved ones and also by remembering how openly people at TED talked about their failures, their failed ventures.
Which led her to this sort of personal mantra, the vulnerability prayer, she calls it. Give me the courage to show up and let myself be seen.
And it flips that common motivational question, What would you attempt if you knew you could not fail? She suggests a different, quieter question. What's worth doing even if I fail?
That lands differently, doesn't it? Because the willingness to show up, regardless of outcome, that's what changes us. That's what makes us braver over time.
The result of daring greatly isn't always going to be a clear victory. Sometimes, she says, it's more like this quiet sense of freedom mixed with, feeling battered and tired from being in the arena. Battle fatigue.
Yeah, she connects it beautifully to that Leonard Cohen line from Hallelujah, that love, that vulnerability. It's not always a victory march. Sometimes it's a cold and broken hallelujah.
It's life asking you that huge question. Are you really all in? Can you value your own vulnerability, your own courage in showing up as much as you admire it when you see it in others?
And saying yes to that, truly saying yes, that is courage beyond measure.
Okay, so myth #1. Vulnerability is weakness busted. What's the next one?
Myth number 2 is the idea, I don't do vulnerability.
Right, like it's a choice you can make.
Yeah.
She quotes Madeline L'Engle here, who said, To be alive is to be vulnerable.
It really is that fundamental.
Yeah.
You can't opt out. Life is uncertain. Life involves risk. Life requires emotional exposure, period. It's woven into the whole experience for everyone.
So, again, the only real choice isn't if you'll encounter vulnerability.
It's how you'll respond when you do, when it shows up at your door, which it will.
She encourages us to ask ourselves some honest questions here, like, what's my default reaction when I feel emotionally exposed? What do I tend to do?
How do I behave when I'm feeling really uncomfortable or uncertain? How willing am I really to take emotional risks?
And she's candid about her own past answers, feeling scared, getting angry or judgmental, trying to control everything, trying to perfect things, trying to just manufacture certainty where there wasn't any.
And admitting she used to be deeply unwilling to take those risks, especially at work or even at home. Why? Fear. Fear of criticism, fear of shame, fear something bad would happen if she let her guard down.
The core point here is that pretending you can avoid vulnerability doesn't actually make you invulnerable. It just tends to make you act in ways that aren't aligned with who you really want to be.
Right. It's like that Rush lyric she mentions. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. You are choosing how to deal with vulnerability, even if your choice is avoidance or deflection. You can't actually opt out of the feeling itself.
Okay. Myth 3. Vulnerability is letting it all hang out. This one comes up a lot. People think, isn't there such a thing as too much vulnerability? They point to, like, oversharing on social media or reality TV.
Yeah, the TMI phenomenon, and the book is super clear on this. True vulnerability is not indiscriminate disclosure. It's not just dumping all your stuff onto anyone who will listen.
It needs boundaries.
Absolutely. It requires boundaries. It's based on mutuality, a give and take. And crucially, it requires earned trust. It's not purging. It's not boundaryless disclosure. It's certainly not using personal details for shock value or attention.
So it's about sharing your authentic feelings and experiences, yes, but with people who have actually earned the right to hear them, people you have a trusting relationship with.
Exactly. It's part of the process of building trust, not step one before any trust exists.
Yeah.
You don't walk up to a stranger and say, "Hi, let me tell you my deepest, darkest struggle."
Right. Not usually effective.
No. Sharing appropriately means gauging the relationship. Can this connection, actually bear the weight as what I'm sharing? When vulnerability is shared within those boundaries of trust and mutuality.
That's when it deepens connection, builds more trust, increases engagement.
But vulnerability without boundaries, that actually pushes people away. It leads to disconnection, distrust, disengagement. Sometimes that kind of oversharing can even be a defense mechanism, a way to avoid genuine vulnerability by creating drama or getting attention without real emotional risk.
Okay, but this brings up that tricky question about trust, right? How do you know who's earned the right? How do you build that trust in the first place? It feels like a chicken or egg thing.
It totally is. You need trust to risk being vulnerable, but you often need to risk being vulnerable bit by bit to build trust.
So how do you navigate that?
Brown uses this wonderful metaphor from her own family, the marble jar. Imagine trust is like a jar, and every time someone does something trustworthy, it's like adding a marble.
Small things.
Mostly small things. Showing support, being kind, sticking up for you, keeping something confidential, remembering something important. Those are marbles in.
And marbles out.
Being mean, disrespectful, sharing a secret, gossiping, marbles come out. Her daughter, Ellen, actually started talking about her marble jar friends, the people whose jars were full.
That's a great visual.
It is, and it connects to the work of John Gottman, the relationship researcher. He talks about trust being built in what he calls sliding door moments.
Sliding door moments.
Yeah, these tiny, everyday interactions where you have a choice, a chance to connect or a chance to turn away. His example is like you're focused on your work, maybe finishing your novel, and your wife walks past, brushing her hair, looking kind of sad.
The sliding door moment is, do you notice? Do you turn towards her, ask what's wrong?
Exactly. Or do you stay focused on your novel, letting the moment pass? Choosing to turn toward your partner in those small moments, again and again, that's how trust builds over time. Consistently turning away slowly erodes it.
So when we think about betrayal in relationships, it's not always the big dramatic stuff like cheating or major lies.
No. The book argues that one of the most common and perhaps most painful forms of betrayal is actually disengagement.
Just not caring, not paying attention.
Not investing the effort, not fighting for the relationship when things get tough, just sort of checking out.
And that hurts deeply because it triggers those core fears of abandonment, of unworthiness. But it's so hard to pinpoint, right? There's often no single event you can point to.
Exactly. It feels insidious.
Yeah.
Brunn mentions how kids often act out when they experience parental disengagement because they can't articulate that specific pain. They just know something feels wrong, disconnected.
So the takeaway for this myth is that trust isn't usually built or broken in one fell swoop. It's built marble by marble, moment by moment. And betrayal often happens just as slowly through consistent disengagement. Building trust takes work, attention, full engagement, and vulnerability shared appropriately within that growing container.
It's about tending to that marble collection, yours and theirs.
Okay, one myth left.
Yeah.
Myth number 4, we can go it alone.
The rugged individualist myth. It's so strong in our culture, isn't it? The lone wolf, the hero who needs no one. Think of all the songs. Here I go again on my own.
Right, but the truth, according to this work,
The truth is, the vulnerability journey, the path of daring greatly, is absolutely not one you can or should walk alone. We need support. We need people in our corner, people who won't judge when we fall, who will offer a hand up when we're face down in the arena dust.
And it's interesting, most of us are pretty decent at giving support, right? But asking for it ourselves.
That's often much harder. She quotes her earlier book, The Gifts of Imperfection, saying, until we can receive with an open heart, we are never really giving with an open heart. There's a block there.
Her research participants consistently talked about needing support from loved ones, maybe a therapist, even finding guidance in books, and this idea that vulnerability begets vulnerability.
Yes, courage is contagious. When someone around you dares to be vulnerable, it often gives you permission, maybe even inspires you to do the same.
It even applies in leadership, right? You mentioned that Harvard Business Review research.
Yeah, Fuda and Badam's work. Leaders who have the courage to be vulnerable with their teams admit mistakes, ask for help. They actually spark change. It's seen as courageous, and it inspires others to step up too. It creates a positive snowball effect.
She tells that story about Clinton, the managing director who stood up in front of his top managers, admitted his own failings, and actually asked for their help.
And what happened? Did he lose respect? No, the opposite. His team's effectiveness soared, they became more innovative, they started outperforming competitors, all because he dared to be human, to be vulnerable.
Brown shares very personally how her own journey of transformation really began when she started asking herself the hard questions about why she was so afraid of vulnerability, and then finding the courage bit by bit to share her struggles and actually ask for help.
She talks about how painful it was initially to learn to just sit with discomfort after decades of running from it, trying to control, manage, perfect, just stay busy, busy, busy to avoid feeling vulnerable.
She realized that armor she'd built, that shield, it wasn't just heavy, it wasn't just blocking pain, it was also blocking her from really knowing herself and from letting others truly know her.
There's such a tender moment she describes, watching her young daughter Ellen just dancing and tumbling, being completely unself-conscious, vulnerable, goofy, and feeling this overwhelming wave of love for her in that vulnerability.
Yeah. And then the penny drops.
Yeah. The profound realization hits her. Her husband loved her like that too, not despite her imperfections and vulnerabilities, but maybe even because of them sometimes. That adults can be loved for who they really are, vulnerabilities and all.
And having that experience, feeling that support from people who were truly in the arena with her.
That's what gave her the strength to take more risks herself, to show up differently, to set boundaries, say no when needed, or not constantly second-guess herself.
It loops right back to Roosevelt's speech again. The people whose opinions truly matter are the ones who love you, the ones who are there cheering you on or picking you up, regardless of whether you win or lose that particular bout. They're in the arena with you.
Not the critics shouting from the stands. And Brown is adamant. Spending your precious energy trying to win the approval of those critics, evaluating your worth based on their judgment. It's just a waste of time.
The transformation she talks about striving for is creating that kind of space for others. Being a wife, a mother, a friend, whose home, whose presence is a place where people feel safe enough to bring their bravest selves and their most fearful selves.
A place where hard conversations can happen. Where shame can be shared without judgment. The commitment becomes, I'm with you in the arena. And yeah, when we fail, because we'll fail together while daring greatly.
Wow, so you really can't learn vulnerability. You can't build courage in isolation. Sometimes just asking for help.
That's the first and maybe the biggest dare of all.
And underpinning all of this, the daring, the vulnerability, navigating the myths, is this huge topic the book tackles head on: shame.
Yes. Understanding shame and developing what she calls shame resilience, it's absolutely fundamental. You can't really embrace vulnerability without it. She calls developing shame resilience gremlin ninja warrior training.
Gremlins.
Yeah, those nagging, critical voices of shame in your head.
Got it. So shame is presented as maybe the single biggest obstacle to feeling vulnerable and feeling worthy?
Pretty much. She tells this funny but pointed story about a guy who came up after a talk and said he'd pictured her as Professor Snape from Harry Potter while she was talking about shame. The scary defense against the dark arts teacher.
Because talking about shame feels dangerous.
Exactly. And it connects to that great Sirius Black quote, "You're not a bad person. What matters is the part we choose to act on." Shame, Brown explains, convinces us that something is fundamentally wrong with us, with our core being. And then we act out of that painful belief.
So the core message is almost counterintuitive. If you feel like you're just not good at vulnerability.
It often means you're actually damn good at shame. Shame is what's getting in the way.
Okay, explain that more. How does shame block vulnerability?
Well, think about putting something creative out there again. A project, an idea. If your self-worth is completely tangled up with how people receive it, like if they love it, I'm worthy, if they hate it, I'm worthless, you're basically trapped.
How so?
Two bad outcomes. Either you play it safe, don't share your real work, maybe strip out anything original to avoid criticism, or you put it out there, it gets negative feedback, which happens. You get crushed, and shame whispers, "See? You suck. You should have known better. You shut down."
And even if people love it.
You're still kind of in trouble, she argues. You become a prisoner of pleasing, performing, and perfecting, constantly terrified of the next time when you might not get that applause.
But with shame resilience.
Your fundamental self-worth isn't on the line like that. Yeah, disappointment hurts. Criticism stings. But the effort was about showing up, about being courageous, about aligning with your values, not about proving you're worthy through external validation.
So your worth isn't tied to the outcome.
Right. And when that's the case, you're much more willing to solicit and actually hear feedback. You're more tenacious, more innovative, more truly creative, because failure doesn't mean you are a failure.
She quotes Peter Sheehan saying something powerful here.
Yeah. The secret killer of innovation is shame. Because shame breeds fear. Fear leads to risk aversion. And risk aversion absolutely suffocates innovation. If leaders want innovative teams, they have to cultivate cultures where vulnerability is okay, which means modeling it themselves.
And shame often shows up as those internal critics, right? The gremlins or shame tapes.
Exactly. Brown talks about her own writer's block, gremlins, whispering things like, "This writing sucks, nobody's going to care, you're just going to get torn apart." Real writers don't struggle like this.
It's not always external messages.
Sometimes it's purely internal. Those old recordings playing on loop. She says she learned how to do shame all by myself.
Why is shame so hard for us to talk about?
Because its power comes from being unspeakable, from staying hidden in the dark. Shame loves secrecy. And it especially loves perfectionists, because perfectionism keeps people quiet about their struggles.
Bringing it into the light.
Naming it, telling the story, wrapping words around it, as she says, that destroys its power. Like flipping on the lights makes the gremlins scatter.
And when you're daring greatly, stepping into that arena, mistakes, failure, criticism, they're not just possible, they're inevitable, right? Roosevelt said, err and come up short again and again.
Exactly. So if every time you stumble, every time you face defeat, you internalize it as proof of your unworthiness, you simply won't get back up. You won't dare again. Shame will be waiting right there in the parking lot to say, "I told you so."
But shame resilience changes that script.
It allows you to feel the sting, acknowledge the hurt or disappointment, and say, "Okay, this hurts. This is disappointing. But T, my value is courage, and I was just courageous. You can move on now, shame." It separates the event from your inherent worth.
Brown boils down some key truths about shame into her shame 1, 2, 3s.
Yeah, simple but crucial. 1, we all have it. It's a universal human emotion. If you don't experience shame, you likely lack empathy and the capacity for connection that's characteristic of sociopathy.
2.
We're all afraid to talk about it. The fear is also universal.
And 3.
The less we talk about it, the more control it has over our lives. Its power is in the silence.
So let's nail down the definition again. Shame is fundamentally
the fear of disconnection. That deep primal fear that something about us, something we've done, something we haven't done, who we are, makes us unworthy of connection, love, and belonging.
It's that intensely painful feeling, that experience of believing, I am flawed, therefore I am unworthy, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I don't belong.
And it doesn't just lurk around big traumas. It pops up in really ordinary, familiar places. The book lists 12 common shame categories based on her research.
Things like appearance and body image.
Money and work, Motherhood, fatherhood, family dynamics, parenting struggles, mental and physical health issues, addiction, sex, aging, religion, surviving trauma, and dealing with stereotypes or labels.
The examples she shares from interviews are just so real. Getting laid off, being asked, when are you due?
Right.
When you're not pregnant, hiding that you're in recovery.
Screaming at your kids and feeling awful afterwards, going bankrupt. Yeah. Your boss calling you an idiot, not making partner, your spouse leaving you or wanting a divorce, maybe the kids aren't with you.
Getting a DUI, dealing with infertility, lying because your dad's in prison, an addiction to internet porn, flunking out of school, hearing your parents fight and feeling stared as a kid.
It's real pain. Neuroscience even shows that the brain pathways activated by social rejection and shame are the same ones activated by physical pain. It hurts. And it's slippery to define precisely because it resists being named.
Okay, so understanding shame is key. And the book also makes these really important distinctions between shame and related feelings like guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. Why is that vocabulary important?
Because it changes our self-talk. How we talk to ourselves in those moments makes a huge difference.
All right, let's break it down. Guilt versus shame.
Guilt is focused on behavior. The self-talk is, I did something bad. Example, you forget lunch plans with a friend. Guilt sounds like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. That was a really crappy thing to do. I need to apologize.
So guilt can be productive.
Yes. Guilt, when it's appropriate, motivates us to apologize sincerely, make amends, change our behavior. It's generally seen as a positive adaptive force.
Okay, now shame.
Shame focuses on self. The self-talk is, I am bad. Same situation, forgetting lunch plans. Shame sounds like, I'm such an idiot, I'm a terrible friend, I'm a complete loser.
And the result?
Shame leads to hiding, blaming others, rationalizing, maybe offering a disingenuous apology. It's destructive because it corrodes our belief that we can actually change or be better. Brown is emphatic. There is no data showing shame is a helpful compass for good behavior. It's far more likely to be the cause of destructive behaviors, addiction, violence, bullying, depression.
Okay, what about humiliation? How's that different?
Humiliation is when something painful or demeaning happens, but crucially, you don't believe you deserved it. Your sense of self-worth isn't shattered.
Example.
Your boss calls you a loser in front of everyone. If your internal reaction is, wow, my boss is completely out of control, this is awful, but I don't actually deserve this treatment, that's humiliation. It still hurts like hell, but you're less likely to internalize it as truth about you. You can stay more aligned with your values while figuring out how to handle the external situation.
But it could become shame.
Yes, if you start to buy into the message, if you start thinking, maybe he's right, maybe I am a loser, then humiliation shifts into shame.
And finally, embarrassment.
Embarrassment is generally the least serious, most fleeting of the bunch. Often, it can even be funny later. The key thing about embarrassment is you usually don't feel alone. Other people have done similar things. It passes relatively quickly, and it doesn't feel like it defines who you are at your core. Tripping in public is usually embarrassment, not deep shame.
Got it. That distinction is really helpful. So if shame is this powerful force, what do we actually do about it? The answer isn't trying to resist it.
No, it's building shame resilience. Because that fear of disconnection, that potential for shame, is always going to be part of the human experience. We can't eliminate it.
So resilience means?
It's the ability to practice authenticity, to stay true to yourself and your values while you're experiencing shame, and to move through that experience without sacrificing who you are. The goal is to come out the other side with more courage, more compassion, and more connection than you had before. It's moving from shame to empathy.
And you said empathy is the antidote.
Empathy is the antidote. Because the core message of empathy is simply, you are not alone. Shame thrives in isolation and secrecy. Empathy breaks that isolation. Shame is a social wound, she argues, and it heals best through social connection, through empathy.
And self-compassion helps you reach out.
Self-compassion is key. Being kind to yourself in that moment is often what gives you the courage to actually connect with someone else and seek that empathy.
Okay, so how do we build this resilience? What's the gremlin ninja warrior training?
There are 4 key elements she identifies. They don't always happen sequentially, but practicing them leads towards empathy and healing.
Element 1.
Recognizing shame and understanding its triggers. This is about awareness. Can you physically feel shame when it's happening? What does it feel like in your body? And can you start to identify the specific messages or expectations, internal or external, that set it off for you?
Okay.
Practicing critical awareness. This is reality checking those triggers. Are the expectations driving my shame realistic? Are they attainable? Are they even things I truly value? Or are they things I think others expect of me? Questioning the messages,
Right.
reaching out, owning your story and sharing it with someone who has earned the right to hear it, someone you trust, someone who can offer empathy. You simply cannot get empathy, the antidote, if you stay isolated.
Kind of four.
Speaking shame, this is about actually putting language to it, talking about how you feel and asking for what you need in that moment, naming the gremlin, essentially.
It sounds like a process. And you mentioned shame hijacks the brain.
Totally. When shame hits hard, it triggers the limbic system, our primal survival brain. Fight, flight, or freeze takes over, and it effectively shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, perspective, and thoughtful response.
That's why people say they feel like they go crazy or lash out or just want to hide when they feel deep shame.
Exactly. Brown shares that example of yelling at her son after her credit card was declined, a totally disproportionate reaction driven by the shame trigger of feeling inadequate or financially insecure in that moment. She went straight into fight mode.
She connects this to Karen Horney's ideas about how we cope with this connection.
Yeah, the strategies of moving away, withdrawing, hiding, silencing yourself, moving toward people-pleasing, accusing, or moving against, trying to control others, using aggression, sometimes shaming others back. These are all ways we try to manage the intense pain of shame and disconnection. But ultimately, they all move us away from authentic connection.
She tells another really raw story about accidentally sending an angry email.
Oh yeah, the misdirected email story. It perfectly illustrates the shame spiral. She was feeling vulnerable about having said no to someone, fearing she'd disappointed them. Then she gets a nasty email in response. She forwards it to her husband, adding her own angry venting comments.
So it's reply instead of forward.
Oof. Yeah, instant shame attack. Dry mouth, time slows down, tunnel vision, the classic physical symptoms, and the gremlins start screaming, "See? You do suck! You're unprofessional, you're mean!"
What did she do? What's the counterintuitive strategy?
In that moment, she remembered a technique and started repeating out loud, "Pain, pain, pain." It sounds weird, but she says it helped interrupt the emotional hijack, engage her thinking brain just enough to stop the immediate spiral.
And then she used her ninja moves.
Yes, her 3 go-to shame resilience moves. 1, practice courage and reach out. Fight shame by sharing the story with someone trusted, someone who loves you because of your imperfections, not despite them. She called her husband and close friends, Steve and Karen.
2, talk to yourself with kindness.
Like you would talk to someone you love who just messed up. Okay, you're human. That was a mistake. It feels awful right now, but you're okay. You can fix this. Self-compassion.
And 3, own the story.
This is huge. She emphasizes, if you own this story, you get to write the ending. If you try to bury it, hide it, pretend it didn't happen, the shame owns you. You remain the subject of the embarrassing event. But owning it, yep, I did that stupid thing, allows you to become the narrator and decide what happens next, what it means. It brings that Carl Jung quote to mind. I am not what has happened to me, I am what I choose to become.
And reaching out, calling Steve and Karen, that provided the empathy.
Exactly. They didn't say, oh, that wasn't so bad. They likely said things like, oh my God, I've done something similar, or that sounds incredibly painful, I'm so sorry. They listened, held space, didn't judge, connected with the feeling, and communicated, crucially, you're not alone. That's empathy. And realizing it was a human mistake, not proof of her fundamental flaw, allowed the shame to dissipate.
It connects back to the power of sharing, too, like Pennebaker's research on writing.
Yes. His work shows that not talking about difficult experiences or trauma can actually be more psychologically and physically damaging than the event itself. Sharing our stories, giving language to our struggles, literally improves our health, lowers stress hormones. Shame thrives on secrets. You're only as sick as your secrets, as the saying goes.
So shame is always potentially there, hanging out on the parking lot of the arena, waiting for us to stumble.
Always. But shame resilience is the armor we build, not to avoid the fall, but to get back up afterward. It's the ability to feel the hurt, the disappointment, the ouch of defeat, without letting it collapse into, I am unworthy.
It's being able to say, okay, this hurts, this is disappointing, but my value is courage, and I was just courageous by daring to try. You can move on, shame.
Because you simply cannot fully embrace vulnerability. You cannot dare greatly if shame has a stranglehold on your sense of worthiness and your ability to connect.
Wow. Okay, so we've really journeyed through quite a bit today. We explored what it truly means to dare greatly, really got into the truth about vulnerability, that it's courage, absolutely not weakness.
We look at that pervasive culture of scarcity, the never enough problem, busted those really common myths about vulnerability.
And dug deep into the crucial role of shame and, perhaps more importantly, the path towards building shame resilience.
Yeah, the core message from Brené Brown's Daring Greatly, it really boils down to this. Daring greatly means choosing to show up, let yourself be seen, and embrace vulnerability. In doing that, well, it requires leaning into discomfort, confronting shame head-on, and actively cultivating resilience day by day.
And thinking about why this matters for you listening right now, whether you're navigating personal relationships, tackling challenges at work, raising kids, stepping into leadership, these ideas offer a fundamentally different way to engage.
It's a path towards more courage, yeah, but also deeper connection. And living from a place where you truly believe you are enough right now, as you are.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, something from the book to mull over as you step back into your own life, your own arenas this week.
How about that revised question?
Yeah.
The one that shifts the focus from outcome to intention. What's worth doing even if I fail?
That's powerful. A great place to pause. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.